In this video, we're going to go over the movement phase and the shooting phase. That includes types of movement and all the steps in the shooting phase, including declaring a target, choosing your weapons, making it to hit roll, making a wound roll, allocating wounds, and making saves. I'm Rick. That was Babber. This is Noob Hammer. Let's make some mistakes together. What have I learned since the last video? Well, firstly, I learned to go a little easy with washes. This is a Grey Knights Paladin, and I started with a base of Grey Knight Steel, and then I put on a heavy layer of Drakenhof Nightshade, and I'm not quite sure if I like it. I'll let you guys be the judge if it looks any good. There are two things we need to go over before we can jump right into the movement phase, and those are going to be unit coherency and engagement range. First thing, quick note about unit coherency. Unit coherency is very important to understand if you're going to get into competitive Warhammer, but for this series of videos, it adds a whole bunch of complexity that I don't feel is necessary. So what I want you to do is when you're moving your units around on the board and you're learning using this video, this series, I want you to just grab your models in a unit and move them around as a blob. It'll be okay, things will work out, and we'll go over unit coherency later. The next thing we're going to talk about is engagement range. Every single unit on the board has an engagement range that is 5 inches vertically above it and 1 inch horizontally around it. The bubble. Do not pop the bubble unless you're in the charge phase and the fight phase. You cannot enter that bubble with movement. Some units are able to move through it, and that's fine, but you cannot end your movement in the engagement range unless you are charging, which is not going to come up in this video. Alright, here we come to the meat of the first topic, the movement phase. I've heard it said before from various sources that games of Warhammer are typically won in the movement phase. And what they mean is that players that understand how their units move, where they can move to, how terrain affects their movement, and also how the enemy might react to their movement or move themselves, gets them into the most advantageous position possible for all the later phases. So pay attention to the movement phase. It's not always just about getting in range of your enemy. Sometimes it's about setting yourself up and hiding, so for the turn after that, you can go ahead and unleash hell. There are 4 types of movements. There's a normal move, surprise. There's advancing, there's falling back, and there is staying stationary. Why is staying stationary a type of movement? Well, we'll get into that in just a little bit. Quick note about measuring. When you're measuring with your ruler or your tape measure, make sure that when you're looking at the base of the model and you're sliding it along the board, that you're always going from either the front of the base to the front of the base when you finish your movement, or from the back of the base to the back of the base when you finish your movement. If you go from the front of the base to the back of the base, you might actually be gaining movement, and then you're a cheater face. Don't be a cheater face. During a normal move, a unit may move up to the maximum value of inches listed on its data sheet. Not complicated. The only things you need to really keep in mind is you need to keep in mind that unless you have the fly keyword, you cannot move through enemy models, and you cannot end the movement within engagement range of an enemy model. That's it. Easy as pie. This Grey Knights Paladin can move 5 inches because he's a beefy boy. I'm going to take my tape measure, measure out 5 inches, like so, and slide him forward up the board to go smite the Emperor's enemies. What if you need to get a unit up the board right now? Well, during movement, you can decide to advance a unit. And what you can do is you take a d6, you roll it, whatever the number that pops up is, that's an additional amount of inches you can move that unit, that movement phase, which is awesome. And why wouldn't you do it all the time? Well, when you advance, typically, there are always exceptions in a game like Warhammer, but typically you are unable to shoot and unable to charge for the rest of that turn. So you gotta really decide, do you need them up there right away, or can you wait so you can use their abilities later? For instance, This Grey Knight Paladin from last video is still a beefy boy, so I'm going to decide to advance him towards the enemy. I'm going to roll d6, adding that to his normal movement of 5, his movement is now 8. Too bad beefy boy supreme here can't choose weapon this turn. Aww. What do you do if you have a unit that's engaged in melee combat and you don't want them there? Maybe they're bad at it, maybe you really need that unit to be doing something else. What can you do? Well, you can declare that a unit fall back. In terms of movement, falling back is everything that is normal. It's your normal movement speed. You then move back from the enemy models that are in combat with you. The downside is you cannot, just like advancing, you cannot shoot, you cannot use psychic powers, and you cannot charge for the rest of that turn. Oh no, there has been a schism within the Grey Knights, and this strike squad is engaged in melee with some paladins. They've rightfully determined this is a terrible idea, so they have decided to fall back on their movement. Their movement speed is 5, so I'm going to have them fall back away from their paladin brethren. Unfortunately, they will not be able to shoot, use psychic powers, or charge for the remainder of this turn. The fourth and final type of movement is remaining stationary. Weird to declare, I know, but it's important to understand that if you have a unit with multiple models in it, and any of those units have a heavy weapon, heavy weapons naturally suffer a -1 to hit if that unit has moved in their movement phase. If any single model in a unit has moved during the movement phase, that entire unit has counted as moving, and thus any heavy weapons in that unit will suffer the -1 to hit modifier. So you can declare that a unit has remained stationary. Let's take this squad of 5 paladins. 4 of them have storm bolters, which are not heavy weapons, but this extra beefy boy in the back has a side cannon. If any of these 4 paladins move during the movement phase, this paladin with his side cannon will suffer a -1 to hit penalty in the shooting phase. Terrain. Moving over terrain is pretty simple. If a terrain piece is 1 inch or shorter, such as this crate, then your units can effectively ignore it as they move over it. If the terrain piece is taller than 1 inch, like this cargo container, you must measure the vertical distance while climbing and the vertical distance while descending, then subtract those inches from your movement. Flying. Some units have the keyword of fly. These units, like the assault intercessors for Space Marines, can ignore vertical movement, so you don't have to fly up and over a building, for instance. You just measure it and fly through it if you need. You can also move through enemy models and your own. You cannot, however, stop within engagement range of any enemy models, regardless. Alright, you've learned all how to move your units around the board now. Let's get to the Daka phase. In this phase, the shooting phase, we're going to discuss how to assign targets, choose weapons, what those weapons' special abilities are, making to hit rolls, making wound rolls, assigning wounds, making saves, the 3 most common types of saves, and finally, killing units. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to declare which unit is going to fire, what unit it is going to fire at, and what weapons it is going to fire. It is important at this stage to understand the various types of special properties that weapons have, which we will go over in a little bit, but you can find all of that information on your unit's datasheet or in your codex. As an example, this squad of 5 Grey Knights Terminators has a total of 5 Storm Bolters, 1 for each of them. I will let my opponent know that I intend to fire at their unit here, and I begin with a single model. Each model has rapid fire 2, they are also Terminators, and they are within half range, so the rapid fire special rules take effect, meaning that each Terminator's Storm Bolter doubles the amount of shots from 2 to 4. I will grab 4 dice, 1 for each shot, and I will make a to hit roll. It is important to note for the speed of the game that if you have weapons in your unit that all have the same profile, so strength, AP, and damage type, you can take all your dice and roll them together. You do not have to do them model by model. For instance, taking that same squad of 5 Grey Knight Terminators, all with 5 Stormbolters, all within half range, and Terminators, all firing 4 times each. 4 times 5 is 20. So that I will be rolling 20 dice while firing from this unit into this unit. Ow! Ranged weapon damage types. There are many different damage types in Warhammer, and you can find them on page 218 of your core rulebook or page 17 of the battle primer, but they include heavy, assault, pistol, grenade, blast, and rapid fire. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the weapon types in this video, but you can go ahead and find that information readily for free in the battle primer, again on page 17. Now that I've done all the math to determine how many shots I'm actually going to take, I'm going to look at my Terminator's data sheet, check out their ballistics, BS skill, and see what that number is. You can tell on these Terminators it is 3+, which means I'm going to roll all these dice, and any of these dice that come up 3, 4, 5, or 6 are going to be counted as hits. 2 important notes about making to hit rolls. The first is unmodified rolls of 1 always miss, and unmodified rolls of 6s always hit. The second note is that some characters or units grant rerolls of certain types. So let's say it's reroll all 1s. You can never reroll a reroll more than once using multiple of these abilities. They do not stack. Making a wound roll. Now that I know how many of my attacks have hit, I can move on to making a wound roll. In this stage, we're going to look at the strength values of our weapon being fired and the toughness value of the unit being fired at. We're going to compare them with this chart to see what we need to roll. These Terminator Stormbolters that I'm firing have a strength of 4, as you can see on the data sheet, and the Strike Squad's toughness that I'm firing at has a toughness of 4, which you can also see on their data sheet. If I look at the chart, I see that an equal number of strength to toughness means that I need to roll 4s or higher to wound those models. So that means 4s, 5s, and 6s will wound. 50% chance for every hit. 3 quick notes about making wound rolls. Firstly, just like to hit rolls, unmodified rolls of 1 always fail to wound, while unmodified rolls of 6s always wound. Secondly, once a model has been chosen to accept wounds, you must continue to assign wounds to that same model regardless of whether or not they've made their saves or have any damage applied to them. You have to do that until the end of the phase. If, however, any models are already damaged, they must have wounds assigned to them first before wounds can be assigned to another model. That means that if you whittle down an enemy unit in one shooting phase and then you shoot at them again the next turn, the next round, in the next shooting phase, that opponent still has to assign wounds to that wounded model first. Alright, so you just shot the shit out of your friend and they're probably not happy about it. Do they get to do anything? Or are they just going to stand back and watch their units fall to your glorious shooting might? Well, they get to take that number of wounds and go ahead and roll armor saves. So they're going to go ahead and look at their unit's data sheet. In my case, it's a strike squad. And they're going to look at this SV value, and that's their armor save value. So for my strike squad, it's 3+. So I will save against any of those wounds on a roll of 3 or more, 3, 4, 5, or 6. You'll notice on the data sheet some weapons have an AP value, -1, -2, whatever. AP stands for armor penetration. The armor penetration value of a weapon affects the armor save. So thus, if say this strike squad was being shot by these Terminators and their Stormbolters had -2 AP, their armor save value goes up or gets worse by 2. So instead of a 3+, it's a 5+. So it makes their armor considerably less useful for shrugging off damage. Another note about armor penetration. If the armor penetration value ever increases your unit's save value beyond 6, so let's say I was shooting that strike squad with an AP -5, right? That would make their armor save 8+. That makes it impossible. And instead of rolling any saves, they just take all the damage. Armor penetration is very important for taking down really tough units. Some units have a special kind of save called an invulnerability save, and this is frequently written out as the number ++ at the end instead of the number plus, like with typical armor saves. What an invulnerability save is it is a value that cannot be modified beyond its value by armor penetration. So for instance, if you're firing at a unit whose normal save is 3+, and you're using a AP -3 weapon, that would turn their save into 6+. But if that unit that's being fired at has an invulnerability save of 5+, it cannot be modified past the 5+. Thus, the unit being fired at would roll saves at a 5+. Quick note about invulnerability saves. The player being targeted chooses to use either the armor save or the invulnerability save. You don't get both. Diving even deeper, there are unit abilities called Feel No Pain saves, which are really abilities and not technically saves, but we'll cover it in the save section anyway because they function very similarly. A Feel No Pain is a save done after a model has taken a wound, and then they get to roll an additional save to save against that wound. So for instance, you shoot them, you hit them, you wound them, they roll their save, they fail their armor save, then they get to roll a Feel No Pain save. Some armies, like the Death Guard, have a ton of them through their ability called Disgustingly Resilient. So being aware of Feel No Pains is important. There is a special type of wound called a mortal wound. And these are typically found when vehicles explode or during the psychic phase from a unit that smites you or certain characters' special abilities. But mortal wounds ignore saves entirely. Feel No Pain sometimes affect them because you've already lost the wounds, but saves, armor saves, and invulnerability saves do not get to be rolled against mortal wounds. So it's important to know what units of yours can do mortal wounds, how they do them, so that you can get through those really, really tough units very quickly. Alright, so the last part of the shooting phase is when you assign damage. So after you've done your hit, after you've done your wounds, after your opponent has rolled their saves, whatever wounds they did not save, you, the attacking player, get to roll your damage. Do your damage rather. Some weapons will have a roll, a D3 or a D6. Some weapons will just do flat damage. So in the instance of my Terminators firing at my strike squad, each one of those hits that gets through would do 1 damage, which would, in the case of this squad, we would look at their data sheet. We'd look at how many wounds each model has. They all have 1 wound at the moment. They're going to get more later, but that's beside the point. And I would remove 1 model for every damage that gets through. Alright, in the last part of this video, I'm going to give you a demonstration. I'm going to bring it all together. I'm going to show you units moving into range. I'm going to show you them targeting. I'm going to show you them rolling to hit rolls, to wound rolls, wounding, rolling saves, assigning damage, and then finally removing models. Bringing it all together, a quick movement and shooting phase example. I'm going to move my Terminator squad up. Their movement is 5 inches. I'm going to go from the front of the base to the front of the base. Once my movement is complete here, I will go ahead and inform my opponent that my movement phase is done and I'm moving into the shooting phase. Now, in the shooting phase, I will declare that my Terminators will attack his strike squad with their storm bolters. I will check their range, which I know for this example is well within range. I'll be in half range, so rapid fire will count, and they're Terminators anyway. They each get 4 shots. 4 times 5 is often 20. So I'll go ahead and grab 20 dice. I'll roll it out. Their ballistic skill is 3+. So I will remove all 1s and all 2s. Doesn't look like I had any 2s. Nice. Alright, so you can see that just from shooting, I've already missed 5. So 25% of my shots have already missed. Now I will roll to wound. So of those shots that hit, which wing off of my opponent's armor straight away without doing anything. Alright, I compare the strength of the storm bolters, which is 4, versus the toughness of my opponent, which is 4. So I need 4s to wound. They are the same value. So I remove all 1s, 2s, and 3s. So you can see that due to probability in the game, we have already reduced those 20 shots down to 6 potential wounds. Now my opponent will take 6 dice and he will roll his armor save. His armor save for these units is 3+. So we're going to roll these, and on 3, 4, 5, or 6, they've saved and take no damage. Alright, so they've made all but 2. So as you can see, 20 shots becomes 2 that are actually going to do damage. Now my opponent will let me know which model he wishes to assign damage to. Let's say he starts with this one. We know that my storm bolters do 1 damage each, so it's going to be a total of 2 damage to this unit. We look at the data sheet and see how many wounds each model has in the unit. If we assign the first wound to this strike marine, who only has 1 wound, my opponent will go ahead and remove him. And we still have 1 damage to allocate, so my opponent will point out the next one to take the next wound. And because 1 damage will also kill that model, my opponent would remove that model. So as you can see, 20 shots, only 10% of them actually did any damage, and we still have 3 strike marines remaining in that unit. And that's it. That is the end of the quick example movement and shooting phase. Well, that's it. This is the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed my guest star, my cat Babber. I hope you enjoyed all of the information about the movement and the shooting phase. Hope that it got you pumped up to play some Warhammer. Hope that you're excited about my next video, which will be about the charge, fight, and the morale phase. My name's Rick. This is Noobhammer. And call your mother.